Well, hello. Uh, Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome. Welcome, everyone, to the launch of this project report, the STRINGS project, changing directions, steering science, technology, and innovation towards the Sustainable Development Goals. I have here a copy with me. It's in black and white, unfortunately. I'm going to raise it up. It's just been published. My name is Ehsan Masood. I'm a science journalist, a science writer and editor. I work for Nature, the journal. I'm based in London, where there have been a few developments on our site. I'll join you a little bit later than we planned. I'm going to be your host for the next 90 minutes. What I hope, what I'm confident, what I'm sure is going to be a real feast for those of us who live and breathe science policy wonkery. The next 90 minutes is going to be roughly, well, it'll be a game of two halves, if you don't mind the footballing analogy. In the first half, we're going to hear from the members of the report team. There are 6 of them, and they'll each speak for about 3 minutes in response to some very basic questions that we've sent them. That will take us to about 2:40. And then in the second half, we will hear from another 6 stars from the research and policy interface. They will give their reflections on science, technology, and innovation and the Sustainable Development Goals. And they will also speak for around 3 minutes each. At that point, at about 3 o'clock, we'll dive into a Q&A. We'll have about half an hour for Q&A. I'm going to start with some questions that I've prepared. Please also have your questions either in the Q&A function or in the chat function. And there's many of you here on the call. I'm counting 127, and I suspect there'll be more. And so we'll try and get to as many as we can. We might have to group some of them, but we'd really like to be able to hear from you. Please also chat amongst yourselves. Tell us who you are. Tell us your interest, and we'll try and get as many of you as we can. Before our report writers and our commenters, I'm very delighted to introduce 2, not just 1, but 2 keynote talks. The first will be a video message, and the second, I'm delighted to say, will be live. Our video message is from Csaba Kőrösi, who is the president of the United Nations General Assembly. Some of you may have heard his inaugural speech just from a few weeks ago, where he announced his intention to establish some kind of science advisory mechanism to the General Assembly, and I'm hoping that he might have something to say in his video message. He's a career diplomat, has been an ambassador and a permanent representative of Hungary to the United Nations, and formerly also head of Hungary's mission to Greece and to the United Emirates. Before that, he was director of Hungary's Office of the President and has a long-standing interest in environment and sustainability. He's a founding member of the Hungarian Scientific Panel on Climate Change, and especially for our purposes, he co-chaired the intergovernmental process at the General Assembly, which signed off on the Sustainable Development Goals themselves. Please can we have his opening video? Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, we live in unprecedented times. Our climate is rapidly changing. Our biodiversity is dying. On our globe, 811 million people are undernourished. 44 million people are at risk of famine. 2 billion people live without safe drinking water. 3.6 billion people do not have access to safely managed sanitation. 1.3 billion people live in multidimensional poverty, half of them children. The deepening geopolitical rift and the risk factors stemming from the unsustainable way of our development jointly create a perfect storm never seen before. We are about to lose some of the gains achieved on SDGs. We are facing a real systemic challenge that can be addressed only by integrated approach. Are we missing something essential to see where is the way out? It is more imperative than ever that we harness the knowledge and the creativity we have at our disposal. Science, technology, and innovation can and should be the catalyst for countries to transform their economies to be better, more just, and more sustainable. To transform our thinking to better understand what is awaiting us. But for this, we need funding. Funding for SDG-related research, especially for low and middle-income countries. Public budgets need to be invested in climate adaptation, sustainable agriculture, carbon neutrality, or disaster early warning systems. Not in weapons, not in warheads, not in the next mass-killing machine. But money alone will not be enough. We need cooperation too. Science provides us with evidence-based options that cannot be neglected in our decision-making processes. In the lead-up to the SDG Summit next year, your recommendations will guide many of our debates in the UN General Assembly. I promise you that scientists' voice will be listened to and their messages studied and their advice followed throughout my presidency. Let me share a quote by the man who made science fun, Neil deGrasse Tyson. Science is a cooperative enterprise, spanning in generations, a community of minds reaching back to antiquity and forward to the stars. I hope this community of minds will help us through these hard times while we try in parallel to manage the crisis and transform the world. I wish you all fruitful discussions and look forward to hearing the outcomes of today's meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kourogi, for starting us off. And a real call to action there, as you would expect from someone who has said, unusually for the President of the General Assembly, that they would like to see science play a much bigger role in the deliberations of the UN's legislature. I'm really happy, proud and delighted to welcome our second keynote speaker for today, and that is Vanessa Nakate. Vanessa, as many of you will know, is a climate justice activist from Uganda and the UNICEF, United Nations Children's Fund, Goodwill Ambassador. Vanessa tells us she is inspired by Greta Thunberg and was Uganda's first youth climate striker, and went on to found the Rise Up movement, which is with young people protesting for climate action all across Africa. Vanessa came to global attention in 2020 after she was cropped out of a press photo taken with other white climate activists, and this was at the World Economic Forum. Vanessa now campaigns internationally to highlight the impacts of climate change already playing out on the continent, and she is the author of a book, A Bigger Picture. And I just want to add, Vanessa is only 25. Vanessa, you're an inspiration. We're pleased to have you with us. Please, over to you.
Thank you so much. President, distinguished guests, thank you for inviting me to speak at the launch of this important new report. Of course, I am not a science expert or a technology expert or an innovation expert. I am a 25-year-old Ugandan climate justice activist. But I am confident knowing that an amazing group of science, technology, and innovation experts will be addressing you shortly. So what I want to share is what I know, what I have seen with my own eyes. In early September, I spent a few days with UNICEF in Turkana County in the Horn of Africa to meet people who are suffering from the historic drought that is wreaking havoc on communities there. Turkana County and other parts of the Horn of Africa have suffered 5 consecutive failed rainy seasons. The drought is killing crops. There is no pasture for the livestock, and water sources are drying up everywhere. Forecasts suggest that the next rains are likely to fail too. This is the face of the climate crisis. The climate crisis is not a future threat. The climate crisis is already here. The ongoing emergency in the Horn of Africa is depriving children of clean, fresh water, of food or livelihoods, and access to life-saving health services. It is keeping them from the classroom and forcing their families to move. The climate crisis is not robbing them of their futures. It is robbing them of their present. It is robbing them of their very survival. During this time, I spent time with people who have done literally nothing to create the climate crisis, but who are suffering its worst impacts. I spent time with moms who are desperately trying to keep their young ones alive, trying to find food and water to sustain their families' lives for another week, another day, another hour. I spent time with their children who are clinging to life. I'm not going to talk about need for climate finance or why we desperately need to put loss and damage on the formal agenda at COP27, or why we need to stop the blah, blah, blah and get on with actually creating an international facility with real money in it to help the world's most climate vulnerable communities. The array of experts that are gathered here today know all of this, and they know it with a much greater level of detail than I do. But I'm going to talk to you about one of the people I had the chance to meet while in Turkana. I met a young boy in a hospital where the worst cases of severe acute malnutrition are referred and treated. It was devastating for me to see, especially when there are available solutions that can be put in place to stop children from suffering like this. Unfortunately, this child's family was not able to access the proper services in time for him to receive the treatment that he needed. By the time the sun set that evening, sadly, he had passed away. This is the reality of the climate crisis. It is happening right now, and people are suffering and dying across the world. The time I spent in Turkana County reminded me that the climate crisis is connected to many of the Sustainable Development Goals. Poverty, goal number 1. Hunger, goal number 2. Health and well-being, goal number 3. Education, goal number 4. Gender, goal number 5. Clean water and sanitation, goal number 6. Affordable and clean energy, goal number 7, and on and on and on. We must not see these issues as separate. They're connected. We are failing to meet not just the challenge of the climate crisis, but all of the other sustainable development goals as well. Our leaders must make sure that science, technology, and innovation is aligned with each of the 17 global goals, to make sure that we are connecting the dots, to make sure that we are thinking differently about the role of science and the well-being of billions of people all around the world, to make sure that we are doing everything we can to encourage inclusive and sustainable development. We are out of time. The moms and children that I spent time with in Turkana County are out of time. Humanity is out of time. We cannot wait any longer, and we must not leave anyone behind. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Vanessa, for those inspiring words. I think you're absolutely right. Time is running out. I think we do need to think differently, and there really is, as we're going to hear from our report authors, a real lack of joined-up thinking and of interconnectedness. With the authors in mind, I'd like to now move to the first formal part of our proceedings and invite two of our authors of the report, Pedro Conceso and Professor Andy Sterling. They're both here. Pedro is an economist and an expert on financing for development. He is, in his present role, the director of the Human Development Report Office at UNDP, the United Nations Development Programme, and the lead author of the Human Development Report, which for, I think, more than 30 years has published the Human Development Index. Pedro has had many roles at UNDP, including chief economist, Regional Bureau for Africa, and others. He has a PhD in public policy from the University of Texas at Austin, which he studied on a Fulbright scholarship. On my screen, to Pedro's left is Professor Andy Sterling. Andy is a professor in science and technology policy and has worked at the University of Sussex, the Science Policy Research Unit there since 1995. His current research is on democracy and sustainability in science and technology, and he's the co-director of a research center, IDS through STEP Center, which is a really good example of some of the things that we're going to be hearing about, which is it's an early attempt at combining development studies with science, technology, and innovation research, funded by the UK Research Council system. There's much more I can say about the two speakers in terms of their intros. I'm sure you can read them. I'm going to now just give the floor over to Pedro first, followed by Andy. Over to you.
Thank you, Hassan, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I wanted to go back to the origins of the collaboration that resulted in the report that we're launching here today. It resulted from the shared conviction by UNDP and the UKRI that science, technology, and innovation are really crucial to make progress towards the SDGs. And they are crucial not only to help us to address the challenges that have been presented to us in such vivid detail by the President of the General Assembly of the United Nations and Vanessa, but also because the world reality is always throwing at us new things, new challenges. And so the engagement with science and technology and innovation should be seen, in my view, as an ongoing learning process. It should be seen not as a one-off where policymakers draw from insights from science, but really an iterative dialogue through which everyone is constantly learning. And so as we celebrate the launch of the report today, and I want to emphasize in particular the spotlight that the report shines on the massive inequalities that exist, not only in terms of allocation of resources when it comes to science, technology, innovation across problems that affect different people differently, but also the inequalities and the deficits in attention to the problems, to the perspectives and the aspirations of many people, particularly living in low-income countries. But above all, in addition to the report as such, I wanted to celebrate the process and here is my hope that it is not a one-off, but something that we continue to nurture going forward. Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's such a privilege to follow the speakers that we've had so far. And I guess the most useful thing I can do for a few seconds is just summarize some of the issues about what got us here, what got the team to the position of wanting to investigate these issues and having the privilege of being funded to do so. And I and many other members of the team, which is an international team spread, as you can see from the report, all around the world. I've worked for more than 30 years on the policy and politics around research and innovation in general. And over that time, pretty much the most important thing I've learned is, strangely, the most neglected in high-level decision-making, wherever that takes place in different ways around the world. And that neglected factor is, in any given field, in agriculture, in food, in energy, that the direction taken by research and innovation is even more important than how fast it goes or how it's regulated or who's ahead and who's behind, the kinds of things that most of the attention goes on. And it's this lack of attention to actively, openly, accountably choosing the best innovations in every different context that is arguably most responsible for the ecological and social justice challenges that we heard about so eloquently in our keynotes just a moment ago, that they remain so gravely under addressed. We're not asking the right questions. So this project is really an attempt to find practical ways to help catalyze more transparency, more rigor, more democracy in helping societies to deliberately choose which ways science and technology should go, not just what comes out of the machine, but what societies actually want. And that's what's needed, we think, in order to get research and innovation more in line with the global needs that we heard about at the beginning of this session. So thank you, colleagues, for joining us in this endeavor.
Thank you so much, Andy and Pedro. In 1 minute, I know this is a really unfair question. I know that this project came about as a result of a grant application. Can you just tell us a little bit about the process that you went through? I think a lot of our viewers would be quite interested. You know, many of them, I suspect, will be researchers, possibly many early in their careers. Can you tell us a little bit about your grant journey as to getting? You know, you're from universities, Pedro. You're from a United Nations agency. It's not a collaboration that we often see. You can tell us a little bit about, you know, what do you think made it through the process?
Well, I think Pedro knows the backstory that really matters behind why this was a call at all. But I don't know, Pedro, if you want to say a word or two to that.
Sure. So as I mentioned, this project emerged out of the conviction that was shared by UNDP and UKRI that we needed to find ways of getting the scientific research, technology, innovation community to have a closer dialogue with policymakers and people in society more generally, more broadly. So it was jointly issued, a competitive call. Andy can speak to how it put together the consortium that ended up winning. And UNDP was really not a recipient of grants in this process, but more a contributor to the process, to the report. And what we take from it is, again, the need to continue this dialogue, to really not see this report as a one-off. It's impossible for any single report to answer all the important questions and all the relevant questions that are put forward. But I do think that it provides for a template that can be replicated to continue that iterative, ongoing dialogue that is so important for us to move towards the SDGs.
Lovely. Thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you to you both. For kicking us off. Please stay if you can. Please join the chat or the discussion as it evolves. I'd like to now invite our next two panelists from the report author team, and they are Tommaso Charli and Ina Steenmans. Tommaso is an economist, He's at the UNU Merit and the Netherlands and Science Policy Research Unit, also at the University of Sussex. His main interests are in technological change, institutional change, and economic development. And he's led and co-led many funded projects around modeling economic growth, structural change, and the impact of innovation on things like employment, inequality, and violent conflict. Ina is an associate professor at UCL, University College London, in the, read out your full title, Professor in Futures Analysis and Policy Science at STEEP, I think it is your institution. And her work focuses on analysis for enhancing the future robustness of policies, and boy, do we need a lot of that right now, particularly here in the United Kingdom. Ina has previously worked as a researcher within the United Kingdom's Government Office for Science. So please take it away, Tommaso, and Ina, over to you.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the introduction. I'll just go first, if I may, just because I'm going to talk a little bit about the main issues that we identified in the report, and then Ina is going to tell us a little bit already about the main solutions. So I thought it might be better for me to speak about what were the main issue first, and then go back. But yeah, let me first of all thank everybody who's attending today, but especially thank the whole team who's been working on this project, because I mean they produce a massive amount of evidence, to which I'm going to do very, very little justice now in a couple of minutes in summarizing what are the main issues. And going straight to the point, I would like to stick to four main issues that we find here. The first one is a problem of inequality in orientation. Now, it will be no surprise to anybody, I think, in this seminar in the panel, that most of the production of science and technology is led by countries in the global north. This applies also to research related to the SDGs. And actually only 0.2% of the scientific output which is related to SDGs is published by authors in low-income countries. Now, the main problem with this is, though, that only 20 to 40% of scientific publication and 2 to 5% of patented innovation globally in the world are related to the SDGs. And this is exactly because most of the STI is concentrated in richer countries. In fact, most of the research in low-income countries is related to the SDGs. Now, one could say, but surely a substantial amount of the research done in richer countries is on low-income countries or in collaboration with low-income countries. No, it's just a mere 0.3%, which is in collaboration. One could also say, but actually 20, 40% of publications related to the SDGs may not be that low, until you actually find out that 60% of the research is related to one single SDG, which is health and well-being, all fine, but mostly focused on diseases which are most prevalent in rich countries. Second, a problem of focus and knowledge silos. Besides SDG 3, most of the research innovation is focused on technical solutions, such as access to energy infrastructure. This is the research which is most closely connected to industry, but which is least connected to policy and society. One could say, well, these are areas where knowledge is more complex and requires more research effort. That might be true, but many of the problems related to sustainable development are driven by complex, unresolved underlying issues of inequalities, as we just heard from Vanessa, I think. Inequalities, education, and conflict, and all this research produce significantly less amount of publications. Although there are many synergies and tension between different SDGs and targets, as we heard from Vanessa, research on complex, unresolved underlying issues on inequalities, education, and conflict are completely disconnected from research on the more technical issues, which seem to guide research in directions which lead to more unsustainable pathways. Third main issue, a problem of regional misalignment. For most SDGs, countries do not change their research specialization to focus on SDGs in which they see increasing challenges. Low-income countries, for example, tend to specialize on historical patterns of specialization driven by aid. High-income countries, as we've heard, responsible for most pollution, do not specialize on research related to major environmental challenges, such as SDG 12, 13, or 15. And finally, fourth, a problem of closing off relevant innovation pathways. Even though there exist several different ways of addressing SDG-related challenges using different types of science, technology, innovation, only a few pathways tend to dominate. And more problematic, these dominating pathways tend to be promoted by a few stakeholders, And as we see in our case studies, different stakeholders will have very different views about how relevant these pathways will be to address specific SDG challenges. And because of the weak connection between technical solution and research on complex underlying social issues, some of these dominating science, as we've seen before, choices are compounded by little understanding on how these complex underlying issues interact with the technical issues, the main pathways which are followed, and therefore again may not lead to sustainable development. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Tommaso. You've set me big up for talking about the solution. Spoiler alert, there's no singular solution. So I actually think that idea and the sort of question of, okay, what did this project find, if anything, about is there some kind of reveal? Are there certain areas of science, technology, innovation that are better aligned with or are likely to have a more positive influence and help us achieve the SDGs? Definitely when I joined the project team, that was something that as a researcher and someone who'd worked in science policy, that was something that drew me in. And I can imagine several on the call may have experienced the expectation of having a response to a similar kind of question. We absolutely looked at that question. What are some of these possible areas? And we took a number of different approaches. And across all of the different approaches, the same pattern occurs. So I'll share two headline findings. One is that if you're looking for specific areas of science, technology, innovation to help achieve the SDGs, it's actually more fruitful to look at different types of science, technology, innovation. So let me illustrate. What we found is that typically much of the attention through funding, through media attention and debate is actually on specific new technological developments, new areas of scientific, like science research, discovery, and translation, and innovations that are very oriented towards like market-driven innovations. Those are the kinds of developments that you see a lot in research publications and in patent applications. However, as a project, we also did a lot of detailed case studies and different engagement exercises. So as one, we did a survey with over 1,300 people working globally on science, tech, innovation, the SDGs, gave their view on, okay, what do you think are some of the key areas of science and innovation we should pay attention to? And the difference between what is typically in the spotlight and what actually came back from over 1,000 different unique ideas of what we should be looking at, that there's just such a difference in types. Instead of looking at specific technologies and market-driven innovations, most of the responses proportionally, and also in their like justification, they were about, we need new social innovations. So that's using new relationships between different groups and individuals to develop new kinds of services and products to address specific social needs. We need greater aid and support for grassroots innovation, like localization of foods supply chains. We need innovations that are actually policy instrument oriented. So an example might be the decriminalization of sex work and as helping attain a number of the SDGs. And then a huge number of sort of evidence that we collected was there's various innovations that relate to instruments that in some way are values oriented and direction setting. So for example, let's look at the way that we promote plant-based diets and the role that they have in shaping new pathways for helping achieve the SDGs. So the first kind of big headline that we found is there's a need for all of us together to have a debate and embracing of a greater diversity and different types of innovation that help us achieve the SDGs. And the other headline is that rather than sort of encourage a kind of like pursuit of your hot list, your top 10 or top 100 areas of science, tech, and innovation for the SDGs, that is impossible. If not impossible, it's definitely misleading and harmful. Tommaso highlighted a few things there that once you start using that kind of language or even producing lists like that, whether in bullet points or in figures, you actually tend up shutting some possibly more appropriate pathways out at the expense of having promoted, or by virtue of having looked at others. And the explanation for that is something that Andy highlighted. He used the word direction. And with that, I'll just finish with an example, is that you cannot ask the question, doesn't a specific area of science, technology, innovation help us achieve the SDGs without putting that into context and exploring not what it is, but how it works and how it has direction. So the example might be blockchain technologies, lots of different ideas about that. It can help us achieve SDG 12 in terms of responsible consumption and production to help us do more circular economy and reduce waste. But at the same time, it has huge energy implications and can even negatively have an influence on SDG 5, on gender equity, because blockchain technologies can be used to help the finance of international trafficking and exploitation of women and children. And so the key takeaway there is to really think about what are these specific areas. We look at diversity and we'll look at putting not the what, but the how. And many of our recommendations relate to that. Thanks, Aisan.
Thank you so much, Ina. Thank you, Tommaso. I'm going to go straight to our final two speakers from the report writing team. Please, big welcome to Saurabh Arora and Joanna Tataway. Saurabh is a senior lecturer in technology and innovation for development at the University of Sussex Science Policy Research Unit, which he joined in 2014 from Eindhoven in the Netherlands. His PhD thesis is from Maastricht, and it's on the networked politics of knowledge sharing and agricultural innovation in and around a South Indian village. I'd love to talk to you much more about that. Joe Tataway, Professor Joe Tataway, is the head of Department of Science, Technology, Engineering and Public Policy at UCL, University College London. Her background is in international development, science and innovation policy. She's worked across the world in lots of different sectors. Joe has also worked in think tanks and is a member of the founding board of management of the of SciDevNet, the news website on science and international development. I'm going to invite Saurabh first to you, and then Joe, if you could follow. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aisan, and thanks to everybody else too for being here, speaking before me, joining us. I have firstly to announce that I am standing here on behalf of a number of colleagues because I sort of helped coordinate the case studies which were conducted in Argentina, Kenya, and India as part of this project. And of course, colleagues, they did the most amazing work on the field. In India, there was Rashid, Nimisha, and Bhuvana. In Kenya, John, Paul, and Nora. And in Argentina, Valeria, Julian, and Augustine. And obviously, I'm not going to be able to do justice to the richness of the work that they have done in the next 3 minutes, but I will have a go by starting to talk about pathways and the diversity of pathways that Ina and Tommaso already mentioned is important to nurture. And that raises the question, well, diversity, why of pathways? Why not just of technological artifacts or designs of machines? Because those diversities are obviously, something that is promoted by corporations as well as states, as well as the modern world in general. Those diversities are not being diminished as opposed to sort of perhaps biological and cultural diversities that are being damaged and harmed around the world, which is why perhaps we are standing here and talking about the SDGs. Now, pathways is a concept that then goes beyond STIs themselves or their trajectories and dynamics over time. It also includes ecological implications of those STIs that are included inside a pathway. It also includes farmers, fishers, workers, whose skills and knowledges are very important for the continuation and the existence of those pathways. So then these pathways over time, they stabilize, and some pathways obviously become more dominant than others. And in agriculture, obviously, for example, we can see it very clearly that modern industrial pathways of growing food with or without genetically modified seeds, but relying on generally chemical pesticides and fertilizers are clearly still dominant after decades and decades of problems, as well as environmental problems, social problems. But nevertheless, today, these modern industrial pathways continue to be promoted as opposed to their alternatives in agroecology and organic farming. Now, of course, there are reasons behind it. Those reasons are reasons of entrenched power. This power drives how the effectiveness of pathways is evaluated. They're generally in terms of narrow, economically defined efficiency for shareholders, efficiency for investors, rather than for society at large. And in terms of technological innovativeness, again, defined in terms of artifacts, machines, and nowadays, even in terms of mitigation of carbon emissions. Now, more often than not, other perspectives that prioritize democracy, social justice, equality, food sovereignty, ecological processes, and so on, are left out of the picture in assessing, appraising pathways. So many of these criteria obviously are central to more than a few of the SDGs today. and if these neglected criteria for appraising diverse STI pathways are taken into account. As we have tried to do in the Strings project, it is possible in each case study, it is possible that the dominant pathways do not appear as effective as usually claimed for addressing the SDGs. Now, it is for foregrounding these plural perspectives that we have opted methodologies such as multi-criteria mapping to address the pathways to appraise them, and bringing equally alongside economic and technical criteria for appraising them, alongside them, we put to the fore social justice and ecological integrity, without which obviously realizing the SDGs will remain little more than a dream. So that's my contribution from the case studies, work on the local fields from India, Kenya, and Argentina. Thank you, Ehsan. I'll pass the floor on to my esteemed colleague, Jo.
Many thanks, Saurabh. You did a great job in summarizing an awful lot of work that went into the case studies, and very interesting and revealing work too. I'm going to talk very briefly about some of the things that we think research funders might think about when they're trying to address the challenges that previous speakers have laid out and trying to align STI to SDGs in a more kind of real way. So obviously in the report, we think a lot about that, but I'm just going to say three things with respect to what research funders could be thinking about. And the first is where to fund. So as Tommaso in particular highlighted, the overwhelming number of outputs, research outputs, publications and patents are produced in high-income country contexts and upper middle-income country contexts. We need to support researchers in lower middle-income countries if we're to produce context-relevant research to address challenges as they relate to national and regional contexts. That has to happen. There has to be more support for researchers in low and middle-income countries. So some research funders are, of course, know this and are thinking about this, and some have very proud records of supporting research in low and middle income countries. So Swedish CEDA, for example, or Canadian IDRC, the European Developing Country Clinical Trials Programme are amongst those who've done innovative things. But as the report indicates, we need to do much more to overcome the really significant skew that exists currently. Secondly, what to fund. Ina and Saurabh have made the point that we need more diversity, both with respect to the kind of research supported. It needs to be interdisciplinary, transdisciplinarity needs to come to the fore. We need to integrate support to meet cross-cutting SDG challenges. They need to be connected to real problems on the ground in national, regional, local contexts. And our case studies, as Saurabh indicated, I think demonstrate, begin to show us some of the benefits that could come from more diverse funding strategies that include different types of researchers, different types of practitioner and policy communities, not just the well-established and usual suspects, but reaching out to those who are less familiar with the world of research, STI research and SDGs, but have crucial potential roles to play in connecting STI to the SDGs. Third, I think we need to think about, and research funders need to think about, learning about how to support STI for the SDGs, because it's still an area that we know relatively little about. And the chapter in the report on global governance, I think, makes a powerful call for research funders to work together on efforts to collect data and learning about how best to fund SDG relevant research. A global observatory for STI, which could act as an equivalent to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPEPC, that would be an option. Funding pools based on constellations of funders focused on particular goals would be another option to explore. Structured regular meetings to monitor progress and enable research funder communities to learn about what works in different contexts also seems important to us. I'll leave it there. Thanks, Ehsan.
Thank you so much, Saurabh, and thank you, Jo. That's a very interesting idea that you put out there at the end. the idea of a kind of an IPCC-esque, IPCC-inspired observatory for the SDGs. And there are, and I think we may come to this in the discussion that's now going to follow. Thank you again to all of the report authors. I'd now like to invite our 6 colleagues from outside of the author team, but who are also very much steeped in policy, research, some politics as well, and of course, science, innovation and development. And they are Lydia Borrell-Damian, who is the Secretary General of Science Europe. Welcome, Lydia. Science Europe is the association that represents national public organizations that fund and perform research in Europe. Lydia is a chemist, and after 13 years at university, then moved into the world of research, policy, and advocacy. We have another Lydia Brito, leads UNESCO's team in Harare as the regional director for Southern Africa. Welcome, Lydia, as well. She's an academic forester by training, and I think is unique in our panel as having been a politician and a policymaker, having been the Minister for Higher Education, Science and Technology between 2000 and 2005. Please may I also invite Anil Gupta. Anil is the founder of the Honeybee Network in India, which is an absolutely fascinating and also truly inspiring organization that harnesses, documents and researches innovation very much at the grassroots, which I suspect is the vast majority of innovation, but doesn't get noticed or catalogued or logged in publications, particularly such as my own. Welcome, Anil. Please may I also invite Khalidza Marwala. Professor Marwala is the Vice Chancellor and the Principal at the University of Johannesburg, and is a scholar in the theory and application of AI to engineering, computer science, finance, social science, and medicine. And he has 23 books on AI. Please may I also invite Haoliang Xu, who is our representative from the United Nations as an Assistant Secretary General and Assistant Administrator at UNDP, United Nations Development Programme. He's had a number of roles at the UN, including the Resident Coordinator Representative in different countries, Kazakhstan, Iran, and Pakistan. He also has a computing background, having been a CAD engineer, computer-aided design engineer, and an assistant lecturer at Tongji University in Shanghai. Welcome, Haoliang. And last but not least, please may I invite Frances Wood. Frances is from the United Kingdom Research and Innovation Planning Agency, where she is International Director and is responsible for all manner of international things. I'm not going to list them all, Frances. I know that you have an incredibly big, responsible and complex job. She comes from the world of diplomacy and was previously the Regional Director for the United Kingdom Foreign Office's Science and Innovation Network, which is a network of science diplomats working in the United Kingdom embassies and consulates around the world. Thank you all for joining. Really appreciate your time. I am going to invite each of you just for a very short, maybe 1 or 2 minute reflection on what you've heard. And then we'll dive into maybe a sort of 30-35 minute conversation or a discussion amongst ourselves. And please may I invite, just to begin with, Lydia Borrell-Damian from Science Europe.
Thank you, Ethan, and thank you also for the organizers, and thank you for the String Consortia to put this fantastic project. And I hope that it will shed light over the many critical issues that the panelists before us have been indicating. I will make of course, I fully subscribe and agree with everything that has been said, and the need to work more specifically in STI for addressing societal challenges in general, and of course the Sustainable Development Goals are a great framework for that. I would like to make to make a reflection here, as we just came out of the Open Science conference that Science Europe organized for the past 2 days, where we had the opportunity to reflect very, very widely, not only at European level, but also worldwide, what could be the contribution, how can we enhance the contribution of science, and how open science is an enabler for that to happen. We recalled the recommendations issued by UNESCO last year on the recommendation on open science, which is a fantastic achievement and offers a perfect platform to enhance the contribution of science for society. In this context, I would like to mention several initiatives that are taking place in Europe, but that even if they are taking place in Europe, they are born with an intention to become also more global, which is the paying more attention to the impact on society by the research results. Currently, we find, at least in the European context, this is not very much rewarded for researchers. They are rewarded by publications, they are rewarded in publications in prestigious journals, and any other type of work that may be considered closer to society is not only not rewarded at all, but moreover, sometimes is even disregarded or considered second-class research. Well, without entering into considerations as to whether this is or not second-class research, what is true is that there are also more types of research outputs that are currently not considered, like software, like prototypes, like research protocols, etc., that could equally be helpful in a context of addressing the global societal challenges. I think that now in Europe, we are preparing a reform of the research assessment precisely to give more opportunities to researchers who also may bring different angles of work in research. I think that open science would be a great enabler for that. Access to knowledge is essential for all, free for all researchers, and even more for research journalists, etc., to enhance research communication. Access to research infrastructures, a broadening set of research profiles in the research careers, better recognition for all these profiles, teaming and twinning programs all over the world to enable the development of capacity in all areas, research capacity in all corners of the world. I think we need to initiate like an evolution or maybe even a revolution based on the urgency that we are all conscious in this platform, based on the urgency that we feel. There has to be a breakthrough in openness and a breakthrough in the capacity to educate more and better people, more and better researchers, to bring together technology, innovation in the social, innovation in culture. I think these three angles are essential for research and researchers to take into account to develop their activities. And I think I would stop here.
Lydia, thank you so much. Let's move swiftly to your colleague, also to Lydia Brito. One question actually that I had, maybe you could try and weave it into your responses. I noticed that that education research doesn't figure very highly in terms of the findings. It seems to be a neglected area of the research enterprise across low-income countries to high-income countries, and I wonder if you maybe had a comment to make on that as well. Thank you.
So I think you are addressing to me. Sorry, I couldn't hear you very well, but if I understand well, you mentioned education for research and how that can impact the kind of research we do. And thanks for that question, Enzo, and thanks to the organizers for having me here, and also among friends like Anil and the Vice Chancellor from Johannesburg. It's good to see all of you again. I would say, Ezan, that part of the contribution of science to the SDGs and to the development agenda, it's about creating critical mass. And critical mass not only on the research environment, but also on the policy making community and also in the societies. Part of science contribution to development should be that our societies, every one of us, use science to take decisions and use science to analyze critically what is happening around ourselves and what is our contribution to development. And in that sense, the link between education and research, it's probably one of the areas that we need to improve. Because when we do, and I just came from a very important summit in Geneva, the GESDA summit, where we are trying to analyze the impact of future technologies in the humankind and in our societies. And it was clear that the education systems of today are not preparing the societies and the citizens that we need for today and for tomorrow. So indeed, we do need to have a loop that research should bring back to education, behaviors, attitudes, values, and most of all knowledge that allows individually and collectively to take the right decisions towards sustainability. The other thing that science does bring to development, it's really alternative pathways. And we heard some examples of things that have worked well, and I'm sure Anil will share with us a lot of those experiences. So when science is mission orientated, is really grounded in the challenges, not only at global level, but being able to connect cross-scale, local, national, regional, global, and really analyze the impacts and grow the knowledge from a bottom-up approach where we get the ingenuity and what all of us can contribute to science really mobilized, then you will see a lot of solutions coming up, because we are dealing with real questions, with real people that have real knowledge to act. And Lydia just mentioned the open science recommendation and the open science movement that we are promoting around the world from UNESCO side, precisely because we believe that science has to be more participatory, has to be more open, more flexible, has to be more responsive. And really what we are talking about, allow me to mention that, and again linking that to education rights, it's really the right to participate in a creation of scientific knowledge, the right to benefit from science. And the COVID crisis we had around the globe really raised up the importance of this human right, of I would say forgotten human rights that is in the declaration, in the charter, showing that if science is not really part of society and is not really mobilizing its potential for social transformation, then science is not doing its work. And for that, you can't take education out of the research arena. And many times we say, no, I'm just a scientist. I have nothing to do with education or with educators. And I think that's a big mistake. And that's why I believe that we need to do more on this loop, education, research, education, but mostly we need to use science as really this driver of ingenuity and creativity of humankind, but doing that in a participatory, transparent, and democratic way, defending the human rights. I always say that the human rights to science is an enable human rights to every other rights, right to good health, rights to good education becomes really with quality of science contributing to sustainable development. And finally, just to really bring another important area of science that was touched in the reports, but we need to give a little bit more strength, is the capacity that science has to connect and connect people and institutions and countries and problems. And therefore, investing on collaboration. Joe was talking about funding systems and mechanisms and inequalities there. I mean, we do need to use this capacity of science to connect in order to really have, solutions that are really good for everybody and that are inclusive and that are really beneficial for all of the people. And science has that power, but by working in silos, by having difficult mechanisms for funding global science, regional science, cross-regional sciences, this ability of scientific work really is lost. And we see a cooperation that is very much driven by competition and by trying to get a career path more clear instead of using science as really a through driver for sustainable development. I will stop here. We have quite a few people. I don't know, Ezen, if I respond to your question. Thank you.
Thanks, Lydia. If we have time, we may come back again. Please, may I invite Professor Anil Gupta. Anil, you've spent probably more than a professional lifetime immersed in the issues that the report covers. I wondered if you could say how much is there something new that you've learned from your findings? You're on mute, Anil.
Yeah, thank you, Hassan. What I'm going to say in the next 2-3 minutes is if more funds were the answer without changing the structure of existing use patterns of funds, then they will only reinforce the barriers. So I'm trying to change the context in which science and society get connected. And one of the central questions is a change not monitored is a change not desired. So for example, if we don't ask ourselves the question as to whether open science has made possible for different communities in the world to develop their own water filters through DIY solutions, then there is something fundamentally missing because 60% diseases are waterborne. And if we want SDG goals to be achieved for equity in health and for gender and other aspects, then it will not be possible without providing local DIY solutions, do-it-yourself solutions. So we should ask some hard questions. And that's what Honeybee Network has been doing for the last 35 years, giving voice, visibility, and velocity to the creative people. Now, what are the questions that we need to ask? We need to ask about where are the big open databases of extremely affordable solutions for and from grassroots? Where are these? Where are the databases? Millions of dollars have been spent on SDGs, but still the knowledge available for people and from people is scanty. Not even 5,000 bits of data other than the Honeybee Network are available on net. Why? In local languages, in multimedia format. So there is a question that we should ask. Secondly, where are the challenge awards for unmet SDGs? Gandhiji in 1929, 24 July, announced a challenge award of 7,000 pounds, which was about £1 lakh rupees, and for redesigning the spinning wheel. And in three years, he could get the new design. This was the design that he got. 7,700 pound award in 29. Now, where are such awards for solving unmet needs? I think we should ask ourselves this question. Where are the partnerships between institutional scientists and local communities in a mutually respectful and accountable manner? This is the solution that we got. So I think we should find out what are the ways ahead. And when we look for the ways ahead, we must make some tangible changes in the way we do things. For example, if there's a solution that a community has found, and this solution is also useful for some other country, some other community across the globe, where are the risk funds which will be invested in cross-country, cross-regional, cross-community learning and replication? I don't know. I'm not aware of any effort made by the CG institutions, consultative group of International Agriculture Research Institutions, in doing large-scale on-farm trials of these solutions that people have developed. Where are the multimedia, multi-language databases that people can learn on their own, even if they're illiterate? They can learn through videos. They can learn in their own by sound. Where is the ethical code adopted by the Science Council? And this is the question we must ask to UNESCO. They must ask the international other bodies of the science, technology, and innovation, which will make sure that when the scientist or the industry uses the data, uses the knowledge of the people, they share with them what they found in local language. Where is the accountability of scientists to the people from whom they collect data and they collect knowledge? So I think it is important that we ask ourselves the questions which will have only clear-cut answers, so that we don't get into rhetoric and we don't get into ambiguous questions, because that will not generate a restructuring of our science. We need to create this kind of triangle globally. I call it G2G model, grassroots to global model, where innovation from one country with investment from second country can go to set up an enterprise in the third country. This is where the solutions will lie, because, and we saw during COVID-19, almost we had access to the UNDP's 115 countries, they have a HackLab network. And there we found in the data that large number of countries had developed independently, simultaneously, sanitizer dispensing models of foot pedal sanitizing dispensers. They developed independently within no time. This was not a center to periphery diffusion, which means people are capable of solving problem, provided they get support, both financial, institutional, and mentoring support from institutional science. And I think this message must be driven home, that if we don't monitor this variable, this change, then we will not get results. So finally, we must ask ourselves a question about how do we forge partnership? How do we do large scale trials of solutions which are affordable? How do we make sure that millions of women use still the cooking stove, which was developed 10,000 years ago, 3 stones and a fire, for hardly 15% combustion efficiency? We know there's a crisis of energy around the world, and it obviously has implications for climate resilience, but we couldn't develop a good solution which will be amenable to use multiple fuels of multiple biomass round the year, work in rains and work in drought and all of that season. Why was it so difficult? So what do? We should use the existing funds differently. I don't want lack of fund to become the enemy of restructuring of the STI system. I've heard many speakers talking about that we need more funds. Surely we need more funds. But if more funds come in existing channels, in existing structures, in existing ways of doing things, they would only reinforce the barriers. They will not resolve these barriers. So we need to first restructure the existing way of using funds. And then surely I'm very optimistic that there'll be more support from society because we have restructured ourselves. So this is the way I think we should try and see how STI institutions can contribute. It is not that they have not done in the past, they have, but it is a marginal contribution. And I've always argued that grassroots innovations, the mind on the margin, are not marginal minds. So we can forge partnership between creative people on one side and public spirited scientists on the other side, and increase their tribes so that more partnerships which can help achieve SDGs can be achieved. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anil. Thank you so much, Professor Gupta, for your contribution. We're halfway through. Please can I now invite Professor Kenichi Mawala from the University of Johannesburg.
No. Thank you very much for inviting me to come and join these esteemed panels, of many of which are actually friends and collaborators. I think one of the things that I can actually draw from the report and what has been said before is that the main issue is that there seems to be, it's not there seems, there is more science that is being generated and used in the global north than in the global south. And now, if we are going to agree that science, technology, and innovation are very, very crucial for the attainment of the SDGs, and we take into account that the top 10 countries in terms of achievement, how far they are from achieving the SDGs, the top 10 are all in the global north, and the bottom 10 are actually in the global south. In fact, the bottom 10 are in the African continent. I think given this problem, I think the main crucial issue is how do we use or diffuse the science that is mainly generated in the global north to tackle the SDG problems that seems to be stuck up in the global south. And in order for us to be able to answer that question, we need to ask ourselves, what are the barriers that we need to overcome? What are the barriers that prevent science from science and its use from diffusing to the global south? And of course, some of the barriers have been talked about. Issues of funding is obviously a big issue. Issue of infrastructure is another barrier that we need to deal with. Issue of knowledge. Much of the knowledge is very Anglicized, comes in English, and the role of language, certainly where I come from, English is not really, many people don't really speak English. How do we make sure that they have access to science? Other barriers are policy. How literate are our lawmakers? How literate are our lawmakers? And if they are not scientifically literate, how can they be able to create laws that are going to make sense for science and its role in tackling the SDGs? And what can be done? One of the projects that we do at the University of Johannesburg is actually a project of training lawmakers in Southern Africa on understanding modern ways of doing policy, understanding some of the and then the issue of access to information, access to data. We take it for granted that it is solved, but in the global south, it's actually a big issue that we need to deal with. I'm not going to deal with the issue of language because it has already been given. Now, what are some of the things that I think needs to be done in order for us to deal with this fact that the global south seems to be falling behind in the attainment of the SDGs, and the fact that there's a need for more science to be invested in that global south. I think movement of people is very, very important between the global south and the global north. It's extremely important. The idea that we can tackle the problems of the global south while we are in the global north only leads to a suboptimal solution. I think the second issue that needs to be done, which I have already talked about, is we basically need to educate our policymakers and our lawmakers. The role of universities is very, very crucial in this regard. The adaptability, the universities should actually be adaptive to be able to create short learning programs and medium learning programs that are specifically geared towards the specific needs of whether it's the lawmakers, whether it is the policymakers, whether it is the NGOs, whoever is needed to solve this problem. And then the other issue that needs to be done is that in the global south we need to increase our investment into science, technology, and innovation. For example, in South Africa, we spent 0.7% of our GDP on research and development. And our goal, which we have completely missed, was to increase that to 1%, and we have missed it by many, many years. And of course, this means that things like regional bodies become very crucial. How do we augment our research capacity by leveraging capacities in more than one country? Like, for example, in Southern Africa, the Southern African Development Community, for example, why don't they come together so that they can have economies of scale to be able to tackle some of the research issues that are confronting us? And then the other issue, which seems to be much more weaker in the global South than in the global North, is really the collaboration between the public sector and the private sector. Certainly in South Africa, what we see is that there seems to be more capacity in the private sector than in the public sector. And in a situation like that, if the two, for example, some of the biggest R&D expenditure actually are in the private sector, how do we leverage that? And how do we, of course, many of these are based on the need for the private sector to remain competitive, and it's not very easy to make them share some of their knowledge, but there is a need to form a public-private partnership to tackle the issue of research and development. And then the last issue is really about infrastructure. And the infrastructure that is needed today is much more complicated. We are finding out that even in areas that we never thought require computational power, biological sciences, now require infrastructure, computational infrastructure. High performance computing now is necessary to tackle climate change, large simulations in climate change, to tackle large simulations in finding cures for diseases, predicting pandemics and many others. And how do we ensure that infrastructure such as computational capabilities do come to the global South? With those few words, I thank you very much for the invitation once again.
Thank you so much, Lucy. Thank you, Professor Mawala, for your comments. We have two presenters to come, and I'd like to invite, just to begin with, Frances Wood from UK. Frances.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to congratulate the team on the launch of this report and the efforts that, it's been a huge amount of effort, so thank you to the team. I think this report is an important tool and catalyst for furthering mutual learning and partnerships across the sector, and showcases actions from across the globe through the case studies that reflect different cultural and socioeconomic context. I will keep my remarks brief given the time, and I think actually a key part of the answer is funders from high-income countries listening. So I have been very carefully listening to the other panelists and what was said at the opening by the team. I think as a sector, we do really need to consider the report recommendations on how we orientate funding and data to the SDGs. But I think it's also broader than that. It's thinking about how we foster interdisciplinary approaches, equitable partnerships, and promoting a diversity of STI pathways. I think that the misalignments mentioned in the report can only be solved in partnership with multiple sectors and actors, as the other panelists have already said. And as a funder, we are carefully considering our own funding and policies, as well as our role as an equitable partner, and how we can advocate for change across the sector. In the interest of time, I'll just pull out three points with examples. So the report talked about bringing together constellations of funders and creating global funding pools. So in the UK, we have something called UK CDR, which is the UK Collaborative on Development Research, that pulls together UK researchers in this field and tries to pull out key data so we can fund better. So I think for me, that's a really sort of good example of a beginning of how you do that. And there was a really key report that was launched at the UN General Assembly in September. The report also talks about recommending a more holistic approach to research evaluation. So here I'd just like to emphasize, and again, with all of this, it is a starting point, it's not the full answer. So one thing that UKRI does, we have an International Development Peer Review College. And so members of this contribute to making decisions about how we fund, particularly those that under the Global Challenges Research Fund, GCRF. So this peer review college has around 300 members drawn from academic and non-academic backgrounds, and they serve for 3 years. And at least 19% are from countries that are eligible to receive development assistance. So I think that's another key thing, is it's about how you involve the Global South in making decisions. And then for the last point, which I think hasn't been made by other panelists, is about how research and innovation can help to build overall economic capacity through basic research. So I think this contributes mainly to the SDG Goal 8. And so here I bring out a sort of really important example where we've got joint funding with South Africa through the Newton Fund. So this project is called Development Africa with Radio Astronomy, DARA. And so the project aims to develop high-tech skills in radio astronomy with the view that this helps to build general economic capacity in a country through STEM. So I think a lot of the focus so far has been on, directly on the sort of humanitarian assistance side and how research can focus on that. But I think I just wanted to emphasize the role that research and innovation can help in the sort of broader economic development in the Global South. So I will keep it there and just say that, it is very much the start of a conversation. And so thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Frances. And last but not least, in a sense, our host, or one of our hosts, Haliang Xu from the United Nations.
Thank you very much, Asham. And a lot has been said, and I'm the last speaker. But first, let me thank UK Research and Innovation for funding this endeavor. I think the report is really an excellent report, which provides evidence. We know there were issues, but this report has crystallized the issues, the glaring problems. Right? It has, outlined. I think really great, and the recommendations are all very concrete. So the question now is, what can we do? Right? And obviously, we need to follow up on the recommendations. And as a practitioner for sustainable development, I think to answer the question, what can STI do to contribute to SDGs between now and 2030, which is the theme of this session? And I would just say that 3 things very quickly. One is that we needed to address the question of governance urgently, both at the global levels and the national levels, because this is, for example, about collaborative arrangements, about incentives, right? About effectiveness of all these investments that we're making. But we needed to make sure that the national regulatory frameworks and global frameworks encourage the connection between the investment in STI and the SDGs. I think this is one point I want to make. And the second point, very quickly, I think is that we needed to really make sure that the so-called the science and policy interface is really strengthened, right? Because we have investments into research, but we needed this research to have an impact. So I think this is a way international collaboration can play a significant role, right? And all UN agencies can contribute to this area. And a lot has been developed in different countries, including in the south, southern countries. We really need to make sure that what has been produced is working. In this regard, we need to work with everyone, civil society, academia, private sectors, or mentioned the governments, certainly, right? So we needed to really focus on this, right? And lastly, I just want to say that we needed to make sure that we can share existing knowledge and encourage learning through stronger international collaboration. We have knowledge, right? But it's really how to adapt this learning in one place to another. In the UN, we talk a lot about South-South and triangular cooperations. Right? So we can use different ways to encourage this learning and adaptation. And I think we needed to have a project like Strengths 2.0, right? To turn these recommendations into actions. And in this regard, we already have, the General Assembly of the President of General Assembly with us. We have UNESCO here today. We have ECOSOC, of the United Nations General Assembly. Right? We have other means, we have internally, we have a high-level committee on program that can, take this report up. Right? We have UN Technology Bank on LDCs, right? That it will be keen to collaborate, on the follow-up. So there's really a lot of, existing mechanisms that we can capitalize on to make things work. So I think we really want to continue to collaborate, with colleagues, with partners in this effort moving forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Haoliang. I just had one, just a short follow-up question really for you, which I feel you may be the best person to at least think about it, which is just to follow up on Professor Joe Chataway's final observation around the possibility of a kind of observatory or some form of similar body for the Sustainable Development Goals, or for particularly around science. There are many different science and environmental policy science processes, like IPCC and others. But what I know that within the Office of the Secretary General, there are different ways of looking and monitoring the SDGs, and then there are also specific groups of scientists like the GSDR report authors and others. So what do you think of Professor Chataway's idea?
I think it's definitely a great idea, and there are means to do it. The Secretary General has an envoy on technology. We have UNESCO here, right, which specializes in the UN, on the promotion of science. And so we have the basic infrastructure already. What we need is a strong support of member states. So I think we just need to take concrete steps, to now really take this report's recommendation concretely, and to make every action count. The time is limited, so we have to really just get things done. And so, agree.
So just for everyone, you heard it here first. Dr. Haoliang Xu is supportive of the of one of the final recommendations. I think I can safely say that to be the case.
Yes, but you needed to promote me to a higher rank in order for what I say to be counted.
Consider yourself promoted, but I think there are 126 people here who would very happily promote you. We've a few minutes to go, and the organizers, Aristia and Andy Sterling and Joe and Marcel, they asked me for some reflections towards the end. And I've been making some notes. Unfortunately, I've not had time to read the report properly, but I've had one read of the text, and I just wanted to offer a few things by way of the text. So I guess one thing is quite clear. Looking at reading the text, and that is that the Sustainable Development Goals are a success for the global South. You can cut the cake and look at it in different ways, but looking at particularly the data in chapters 5 and 6, I think that has been produced around just publishing patterns. There is a lot of activity. There's a lot of orientation of science in the low-income countries, the low and middle-income countries, towards the Sustainable Development Goals. Clearly, much more than in the high-income countries. But that's if we disaggregate those two things, that for me feels like a win for the countries of the global South. Clearly, it's not the case for the global North. Both in volume terms, it's very small, as the report says, and also the trend is worryingly in the wrong direction. One thing that I'm going to follow up with the authors on is that for some of the areas of the SDGs that have been looked at, it seems that the plateauing of publications of science around the SDGs has happened quite a while ago, around the early years of the SDGs. And so one corollary of that, or one implication, is that in fact the SDGs have had almost no impact, or negligible, relatively little impact on science funding policymaking, science funding strategy in the countries of the global north. And I think that's a question that we should, if it's the observation may be wrong, but if it is a valid observation, then I think it's something that we perhaps need to interrogate. I think I took Professor Anil Gupta, your point about language, and it's I think Tommaso and his colleagues are very clear in their findings that that they're in a sense they've been assessing Web of Science literature, which is predominantly in English and predominantly in journals that are indexed by that source. And of course, as we know, and Professor Gupta, you know more than anyone perhaps on on this call, how relatively little of that information ends up, as you've said, in these sorts of places. And I wonder, as a sort of follow-up study, if there are ways, and this may already been done, if there are ways of assessing innovation, particularly innovation in languages other than European languages particularly other than English. But I suspect I'm probably looking at the person who's done that already. So I'm going to stop at that point. Two just other sort of quick thoughts, really. We haven't talked much about politics, and I know it's a really difficult subject, particularly in an intergovernmental setting. But of course, all of us here are creatures of our political systems, and and it has. I'm sure it hasn't failed. I'm sure we're all aware of the fact that here in the United Kingdom, we're undergoing a political transformation, and the kinds of grants which have funded the work that we're all benefiting from. Those, particularly the GCRF, the Global Challenges Research Fund, the Newton Fund, these need to be renewed. This is absolutely no criticism of you, Francis. You're relatively new in the job, and I'm sure you're a key part of this activity. I think somehow we've got to find ways of transcending that when the politics changes and particular grants go out of fashion. That evidently has implications for the sustainability of projects. And we've seen this in GCRF grants. A lot of them were cancelled at quite short notice. And yet, those were the grants that were supporting, so much of the work that we're talking about now. And I'm very, very optimistic, Francis, that you're going to do good things in your role. And let's just finally, just to shout out to Professor Joe Chataway's observation. And if there's, if as a follow-up, there is scope for monitoring of some of this work, more sustained, institutionalized. I don't think it needs to be all bells and whistles, sort of IPCC style, but something like that, and of course, collectively, there are so many institutions and universities here present that it shouldn't be beyond us to somehow make that happen. Considering, of course, that there are already things in place, so maybe there's some reviewing that's needed to be done. These are just some very, very initial reflections, some initial thoughts. They do not represent Nature or my employer. These are just me as an observer and a reporter of these issues. But I'm again just very grateful to all of you for joining. Very grateful to our panelists who come in for the second half. Grateful, of course, to the Strings report author team, to the funders, and the many, many people behind the scenes who are always working overtime and burning the midnight oil to make these events happen and to make them and to make everything sing, and who often don't get a shout out. So a big shout out to all of them, and especially, of course, Aristea, Ruby, and colleagues. I think that's. I think we're done for the day. If there are any other questions or comments, please do contact the Strings team. Some of the links are in the chat for you to follow up on. And with that, I bid you farewell and thank you again for your time and for your interest, and best of luck. Thank you.
Thank you, Ehsan. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Ehsan. Thank you, everybody, for participating.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Ehsan. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Great discussion. Thank you. Bye-bye.